Welcome to the opening session of the 2014 Environmental Forum of Marin Lecture Series, our best and most exciting ever. I am Greg Brockbank, and I was asked to be the director a couple of months ago to fill in for someone that had a family emergency, and I'm delighted to do so. I first graduated from the forum over 25 years ago, the master class, and I have taken the lecture series, I think 4 out of the last 5 years, because A, it bears repeating, and B, there are new topics and new speakers every year. Now, the deal is, a lot of people don't know, how do you become a member of the Environmental Forum, which I always describe as sort of an elite, please don't read anything bad into that, hands-on, in-field environmental training program, the likes of which has never been seen before. And we've been doing this for over 40 years here in Marin with the master, what's now called the master class, and we'll be doing it again this fall. So please, if you could possibly spare most of Tuesdays for a few months starting in late August, keep that in mind. Now, the lecture series is a lot quicker. It used to mostly be Saturdays, but starting a year or two ago, they started working in some weeknights as well. This is a shorter one than usual, just 4 sessions. Tonight is the first on fracking, as you know. That's why you're all here. The second one is on a Saturday morning, 10 days from now, at the Sausalito Bay Model on sea level rise. And then a month later, the third session is on wildfire. And then in May, the 4th and final session of this 2014 lecture series is transportation and land use. All very good topics. I hope you'll come to as many of them as you can. Ideally, register online at the website, marinefm.org. Hopefully you all got one of these wonderful, beautiful little bookmarks which gives all the dates and the topics on the back so you can carry them around with you, put them in your purse, put them in your pocket, put them on your refrigerator. Most importantly, put them on your calendar. And there are also some flyers for the next session on sea level rise that you can get out on the table. So there's literature out on our tables there in addition to literature from other organizations. But I digress. How many of you here in the audience tonight are already members of the Environmental Forum? Good. It's usually over half. We started a new policy a few years ago that if you're a member, all these are free. And if you're not a member, they're darned inexpensive. So it's a good deal whether you're a member or not. But becoming a member is not quite as simple as it used to be. You used to have to take the entire master class. When we started the lecture series, then you had to take the entire lecture series. But that was when there were about 8 sessions. Starting last year with 6 sessions and this year with 4 sessions doesn't quite qualify for membership. That's why I encourage you to take the master class. But to be a member, you need to have taken an entire series of a certain number of classes, and the number is a little bit in flux, and you need to pay your dues. So probably a lot of you thought you were members, and because you've taken these classes before, maybe not all of them, or maybe not enough of them, and you went and signed up as a member only to find that you're not really a member either because you didn't take enough classes or you didn't pay your dues. But that's okay. There'll be an opportunity to do that. And if you haven't paid your dues, please do. You can do that here tonight as well. Anyway, I just want to mention that Marin TV, Community Media Center of Marin, is taping the session tonight. They've been one of our sponsors. We've been one of their sponsors. They're a great nonprofit organization that tapes the city council meetings here, and they do a great job, and it's wonderful to have them taping our sessions. I'd like to ask everyone here, turn off their cell phones, please. I've mentioned the other topics coming up. I'd like to mention that we have a few elected officials, which we don't usually have, and it's customary in any political gathering or quasi-political gathering to announce elected officials, not because they're egomaniacs, although some, no, it's because they kill themselves to raise money to buy name recognition, and they work really hard, virtually for free or for free, and we ought to be able to thank them and give them the benefit of their hard work by acknowledging them. One of them, who I don't think is here yet, Scott, but he will be any minute, will be speaking to us tonight, our Assemblyman Mark Levine. Steve Kinsey signed up, our county supervisor, but I don't think he's here yet. Hopefully he's one of the ones that's delayed that will still come. And we do have a member of the Belvedere City Council, Claire McAuliffe. Rather than mention the 8 or 10 board members of the Environmental Forum, I'd like to ask them to stand up so we could acknowledge them. Will the members of the board of the Environmental Forum this year please stand up? There's a lot of new board members. They're all very hardworking board members that all have key roles in putting on this series to educate the public, and we're all very grateful to them. Particularly, I want to acknowledge Sarah Kelly, who is the president of the board. Thank you, Sarah. I'd also like to welcome an organization, Main Street Moms, many of whom are Forum graduates, taking that experience into the world and doing impactful advocacy work. Kathy Calloway and others, you want to stand up and be acknowledged? Disclaimer. The Forum, as an organization, remains neutral on issues and does not take positions on political issues. Please note that anything you hear tonight is not the direct opinion of the Environmental Forum of Marin. And now I'd like to introduce the coordinators of tonight's session. Kristen Anderson is a graduate of Class 34. We're now up over 40. Graduating in 2006, she holds an MS degree in Health and Exercise Science and Environmental Management. Since graduating from the Forum, she has been working on the reduction of plastics in the marine environment, wastewater reclamation, and is currently working with the Main Street Moms on Fracking in California. The quilt on display out in the lobby was created by Kristen to celebrate healthy marine life. Please acknowledge Kristen Anderson. And now it's my great honor to introduce the other co-coordinator of tonight's program, Nancy Bell, who is a graduate of Class 37 and 5A, and she's being modest. She's taken it many times in recent years, like I have. Graduating from both in 2009. After completing the Sustainable Practices Certificate Program at Dominican, she joined the Forum's board in 2010, directing both the lecture series and the master classes. She served as vice president in 2012 to 2013. And I'm sure everyone here that doesn't know her, I imagine most of you do, she is one of the hardest working, best organized, great, wonderful face of the Forum, who has just done a tremendous job and is finally getting to step back a little bit, but not before she's been in charge of not just this evening, along with Kristen, but really has been played a tremendous role in the entire series this year. And so please join me in thanking and having me turn it over to Nancy Bell.
I love seeing all these faces. I don't think we've filled a room this much in a long time. Last year we had about 77 people for the climate change session that opened up the lecture series, and I think we have on the list 90 people scheduled to come tonight, so hope we have enough seats. What a horrible problem. So again, thank all of you for coming tonight. Fracking is our topic, and in and of itself, it's a really complex topic. So if you've come tonight expecting to hear everything you ever wanted to know about fracking, we're not going to make that goal. We've only got 2 hours, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if you left with more questions than answers. But that should spark your curiosity to do further research and learn more about what fracking is all about. In particular right now also is last week Governor Brown declared that the state of California is in an drought emergency. And what you will hear more about tonight is the amount of water that is required for fracking. And in the scheme of things, when we're low on water, does it really make sense to allocate water to fracking? That's just one of the small pieces of the puzzle in regards to fracking, but I think it brings it home to us here in Marin. We don't really have to worry about fracking in our county. Among other reasons, Marin County has, the Board of Supervisors passed a moratorium on fracking, actually a ban. So we will not have fracking in Marin, but we will be impacted by it as it progresses in California. So that's what you're going to hear more about. And you'll see on this slide that over 336 cities and counties in the U.S. have passed measures either banning fracking, putting out a moratorium, or some kind of restrictions on fracking practices in their areas. So needless to say, this is a very hot topic nationwide as well as globally. Many, many countries have also put out measures banning or limiting fracking, as you can see on this slide up here. So this is a huge issue for everybody, globally, nationally, regionally, locally. What I'd like to do real quick, though, before we get moving on, is this. We've formatted tonight a little differently than what you might be used to before. We're not going to have PowerPoint presentations. There'll be some slides that will be on during the evening, but they're more just for your reference. We're not really using them as part of our presentations. So what we're going to do tonight is, first, I'll tell you what we're going to do first. We have allocated 30 minutes minimum at the end of the session, before the session ends, for you guys to have an opportunity to come up to a microphone, which we'll have placed, so you can ask questions or make comments to our panel, which will consist of 7 people by the end of the evening. So we've reserved 30 minutes specifically for that. And leading into that, when I'm done, I'm going to bring up Briana Mordick from NRDC to give you a little bit about the science about fracking, particularly in reference to our water crisis. When she's done, Kristen's going to take over, and we're going to have about a 40-minute session between Kristen and 3 of our panelists, whom I'll introduce a little later, talking about fracking. And I don't know if any of you have ever been to the Commonwealth Club, but that's kind of the format that we're using. So Kristen is Greg Dalton. And she has put a lot of work into this. She knows this subject backwards and forwards. I think you'll be really pleased with the job that she does in bringing out from our panelists the key points that you need to hear about fracking. When Kristen is done with the panel, Mark Levine will be coming up for a few minutes to bring you up to speed on what his efforts are towards getting a moratorium against fracking for the state. So he'll update you on that. This is the Environmental Forum of Marin, and what we talk about is education for action, as well as being advocates for the natural world. So Main Street Moms is going to come up and tell you what they're doing. Quite a few of them are graduates of the forum, and they've taken this advocacy to heart, and they are doing a phenomenal job. They're going to share that with you, as is Ken Jones from 350marin.org to tell you what their organization is doing, just to give you an idea of what you can do also to get involved if you so choose. And they will also be here at the end of the evening for you to talk to them one-on-one. But right now, I'd like to introduce Briana Mordick. Briana is a staff scientist at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Previously, she worked for Anadarko Petroleum for 6 years as a petroleum geologist on projects including shale gas, tight gas sands, and CO2-enhanced oil recovery. Think you know what she's talking about. At NRDC, she serves as a technical advisor on issues related to oil and natural gas extraction and geologic sequestration of carbon dioxide. So tonight she's going to talk to you about fracking and the California water crisis. Briana?
Well, I want to thank the forum for having me and for the opportunity to speak to you all tonight. I'm going to be talking just briefly about the water use and fracking in the context of California's current water crisis. So this is a current drought map of the United States from the U.S. Geological Survey. You can see darker colors are more severe drought conditions. A significant part of the country right now is experiencing some level of drought conditions. And then, of course, zooming in on California, basically the entire state is experiencing some level of drought right now. As Nancy said, obviously, Governor Brown just recently announced a drought emergency in California. So California is in crisis right now when it comes to water. And then contrasting that, California is one of the largest water users. In fact, according to the most recent survey from the U.S. Geological Survey, is the largest user of water in the United States. Used about 11% of water in 2005, which is the most recent year that data is available. The USGS does these surveys of water use every 5 years. So the 2010 one should be coming out. It's a little bit delayed, but it should be coming out at the end of this year. So in 2005, California used almost 46 million gallons of water per day. That's about 70,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, so significant water use. So, obviously in a state that's experiencing drought, in a state that already uses a significant amount of water, any new uses of that water are a concern. The biggest use of water in California, probably not surprisingly, is for irrigation. That's about half of the water use. The next biggest use, coming in at just below 30%, is for thermoelectric power. In 2005, in the survey, mining, which includes both hard rock mining and petroleum and oil and gas extraction, was less than 1% of California's water use. Now, does that mean we shouldn't be concerned about that? Of course not. Like we're saying, any new claim on California's water is a concern. And additionally, although it may be a small piece of a big pie, it can often be a large piece of a small pie. Water use for fracking and for well stimulation can be a significant local issue with the potential to have significant local impacts. So what kind of water use are we talking about in California right now? When SB4 was passed last year, they instituted new regulations on well stimulation, including hydraulic fracturing in California. One of the things that operators have to do now is give notice to the state when they're planning to do hydraulic fracturing or well stimulation. So as of December of last year, operators had to start filing those notices. So in the past 2 months, they've filed about 249 notices. 36 of those were for matrix acidizing, which we can get more into later. The rest were for hydraulic fracturing. Average water use in those notices, what they're proposing to use, is about 200,000 gallons of water per well. Now, a caveat on this data is that the operators are pretty much just submitting cookie cutter data for every well. If they're going to frack 100 wells, they're submitting the exact same information for every single well. So they're saying they're going to use the exact same amount of water, exact same amount of chemicals. So take this information with a grain of salt. We're not really going to get the good data until they have to submit the post-completion report where they actually report what they actually used. The use number looks relatively small, relative to what you're hearing in other parts of the country, like back east or in the Bakken, where you're hearing millions of gallons per wells, things like that. The other thing to note, though, is that the vast majority of these wells are using fresh water. Only a handful are using produced water, which is the brine that's naturally produced with oil and gas, or a mixture. Given these smaller numbers, industry often says, in California, we use much less water than you're hearing in the Marcellus or in the Bakken. Should we not be concerned? Well, of course not, because that number by itself doesn't really tell you much. It doesn't really mean anything. We need to think about it in terms of the amount of water that they need to use per the amount of energy they're trying to extract, right? So back east and in places like the Bakken, they're using horizontal wells to extract the gas. The reason they're doing that is because with one well, you can contact much more of the formation. You can get a lot more oil and gas from a single well. In California, you'll hear people say, it's not really conducive, the geology here, to using those horizontal wells. The geology here is really folded and faulted, and we can't use those horizontal wells. And that's true. Most of the wells that we're seeing those notices for are for vertical wells or directional wells, where basically it starts here and then it kind of takes a little bend and goes back down vertical. And so that's really why we're seeing those lower water use numbers, because it takes more wells to extract the same amount of oil that you could extract with a horizontal well. So let's say that horizontal well is going to need 1 million gallons of water. If you want to extract that same amount of oil using vertical or directional wells, you need more wells. So it takes 5 wells to extract the same amount of oil that it takes one horizontal well to extract, 5 wells times 200,000 gallons per well, you're getting to those higher numbers. So it's misleading to say that, we're using so much less water here. It's going to take more wells to get the oil out here. So the total water use still has the potential to be significant. The other reason we're concerned about it is because, this is a picture of the water cycle. You may remember this from science class. Basically just shows how water moves through the environment, the natural water cycle. a lot of the uses in California are, even though we're using a lot of water, it's non-consumptive. So they take the water out, but they put it back into the water cycle. Maybe not in the same place that they took it out, but it's getting back in. Hydraulic fracturing and acidizing and well stimulation are consumptive uses of water. That water is highly polluted after it's used. You cannot put it back into the source that you took it from without extensive treatment. So that's the other reason we're worried. Even though it may be a relatively smaller amount of water, it's consuming that water. You're not going to get that water back ever. So on the upside, there are techniques and strategies that the industry can use to reduce their freshwater use. There are some operators operating in some places who don't use any freshwater at all. Some of the ways they're doing that is by using different chemical formulations, which obviously the chemicals themselves are a concern as well. But these waters, the oil and gas industry generates hundreds of billions of gallons of wastewater every year. And for the most part, what they're doing with that water is just re-injecting it back underground, either for enhanced oil recovery or they're just putting it down a disposal well. But that water can be used for this purpose instead of fresh water. They can, with available treatment technologies, it can be treated enough to be reused in lieu of fresh water. There are also alternatives to using water as the base fluid. Gases can be used in some cases. The other environmental benefit of that is if it's just gas, there's no chemical use associated with that. And they're also looking at, sort of new and innovative ways to do it. So, there are ways and strategies to reduce the demand on fresh water. You'll often hear industry say, oh, we're not using that much fresh water, we're using recycled water, we're using produced water. But I think the proof is in the pudding when you look at those stimulation notices, like you saw on the previous slide. The vast majority of those are fresh water. So operators in California are not currently using a lot of this wastewater. They are currently drawing on fresh water. So it's certainly something to be concerned about. Again, in California's currently sort of oversubscribed water, and given the current drought, it's definitely one of many concerns that we have with fracking and well stimulation.
We're actually ahead of schedule. Whoa. Okay. Thank you, Briana. Keep in mind what there she is, what she had to say. That'll play into what you're going to be hearing moving forward. So what I'd like to do now is just introduce you to our panelists, and then Kristen will be up here. You've already met Briana. Richard Heinberg, on the left, is not a new face to the forum. Richard has spoken for us many times before, and we're really, really happy to have you back, Richard. Richard is a senior fellow at Post Carbon Institute in Santa Rosa. See, I can't see you with these on, and I can't see this with them off. He's regarded one of the world's foremost peak oil educators and has authored scores of articles, essays, and books on the subject. And some of those books you'll see out in the lobby. His latest book, Snake Oil, which is specifically about fracking, I read it cover to cover. It's very, very informative. It's not so far over your head that you think, wow, I don't know what's going on here. I think it does a great job. I'm supposed to hold up the book, but I left it out in the lobby. But anyway, there it is. And you can actually buy copies tonight if you want. David Turnbull on the far, I don't know my right from my left either, so on the end. He's the campaign director for Oil Change International, where he works on domestic and international campaigns to end fossil fuel subsidies and to slow the spread of dirty energy money and fossil fuel infrastructure from tar sands and fracking. Previously, he was the executive director of the Climate Action Network. So now I'm going to hand things over to Kristen, and you've got the floor.
Thank you, Nancy. I am so honored that the forum has asked me to be the moderator this evening, but I'm even more honored to be among this audience, because in this audience you're either inquiring or inspiring or both. And you have to be careful, because before you know it, you'll be an environmental activist, and then you'll be either a member of the Main Street Moms or 350 Marin and riding buses to Sacramento. That's what we're hoping for. So good evening, distinguished panel. The first thing I would like to ask you is to describe the organizations that you work for and what you've been doing in that organization with regard to the fracking issues. And I'm going to start with you, David, but I want to let you know that you have about 40 to 45 minutes this evening to answer about 12 questions, and there will be about 3 to 4 minutes for each question. I will be addressing some of you specifically on the questions, but if you feel that you want to weigh in on a question that one of the other panelists is speaking about, please feel free, because we've got some wiggle room and we don't want to miss anything from you. So first, let's start with you, David. Could you tell us a little bit about Oil Change International and what you folks have been doing with regard to this issue on fracking?
Thanks. And first of all, thanks so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight. So Oil Change International is a group largely actually based in DC, but we have a few staff here in the Bay Area. And we're focused on what we call removing the barriers to the transition to a clean energy economy. We see barriers basically being put out there by the fossil fuel industry through trying to influence our politics by campaign contributions and lobbying, by trying to create a status quo of environmental regulations that don't protect the environment and don't protect our climate. So we do research and advocacy to try to expose the true costs of the fossil fuel industry, the true costs of oil, in order to really help to galvanize efforts to increase environmental regulations and move us towards those clean energy solutions that we know are out there. So we spend time exposing the influence of the fossil fuel industry on politics by showing how much money they give to politicians through a database we call the Dirty Energy Money Database. It's tracking millions of dollars going to the U.S. Congress, and now we're also going to be tracking some of the state legislatures as well. So we do research, but we also do campaigns. And I'll hold this up right now, but I'll talk about it, I think, more later. This is our campaign in California. It's called Big Oil Brown. It's focused on fracking, and as you can see, it paints Jerry Brown as an oil tycoon. In fact, this is J.R. Ewing from Dallas, as you might remember. The point is that we're trying to expose the fact that Jerry Brown is being influenced by the oil industry, despite the fact that he really wants to be, or at least says he wants to be, a climate leader. So we're trying to show that, the oil industry is having a major impact in policy in California, and that he needs to actually step aside from that impact and really show that he's going to be a true climate leader by stopping fracking in our state. So we're working on fracking here in California from a climate perspective. Of course, we care about the local impacts fundamentally and really are worried about the impacts on water and air and other places and other ways that fracking impacts local communities. But from a climate perspective as well, we're seeing that fracking for oil in California is something that, if we're going to address climate change adequately, just simply can't happen. So that's where we're coming from and what we're working on. We've got this campaign. We're a part of a coalition of groups called Californians Against Fracking that are working to put a ban on fracking in the state. And we're trying to inform the public about the impacts of fracking for oil in California and what that could mean for our climate. We're also helping folks in other states as well. In Pennsylvania, we've been working with activists there, or fractivists there, to expose the way that dirty energy money has impacted Pennsylvania's state policies on fracking, and we're doing the same in Ohio and Colorado and elsewhere. I'm really trying to help local activists to really pressure their governments, expose the influence of the oil and gas industry, and push to end fracking in their states as well.
Thank you, David. Just a note, these are very sensitive microphones, and you don't have to get very close to them. If you get too close, you'll get a little bit of reverberation in the speakers. Thank you. Briana, do you want to tell us about the National Resources Defense Council?
Sure. Well, maybe I have to get closer. We work on a broad range of environmental issues, everything from climate to energy to water to land and wildlife. Specifically on the fracking issue, we've been involved in the issue for quite a number of years, and both at the national level and here in California, we're working on a number of different initiatives and strategies. One, we're helping to push for moratoria. New York State obviously has a de facto moratorium right now, and we've been very active there in helping see that stay in place. We've been active in pushing for one in Illinois, and now for pushing for one in California. We also invest time and energy in helping the people who are living with fracking right now help mitigate some of those impacts by pushing for stronger regulation in places where we can get it. And also through what we're calling our Community Defense Project, which is providing legal assistance to communities who want to ban or institute moratoria on fracking, helping provide them the resources they need to see that those pieces of legislation get through. So that's kind of a very broad overview. We're mainly working in California, Illinois, the Rocky Mountain states, New York, and the Marcellus, North Carolina now. So kind of looking at, and then also at the national level, working with EPA to see that they reopen the investigations of groundwater contamination that they've dropped, following their national study of the risks to drinking water from hydraulic fracturing. And then also pressuring the BLM to significantly improve their proposed rules. We're also calling for a moratorium on fracking on all public lands because of how poor their proposed regulations are. So it's kind of a broad overview of what we're doing.
Great. I guess there's a reason why they're not fracking in Belvedere and Newport Beach. It's not an equal opportunity technology, is it? Richard, would you tell us about the Post-Carbon Institute and what you folks are doing?
Post-Carbon Institute is a nonprofit think tank headquartered in Santa Rosa, just up the road. We promote energy literacy and critical thinking. Now, with the advent of shale gas and tight oil in the last few years, as we've seen U.S. oil production shoot up by over 2 million barrels a day and U.S. natural gas production reach record levels, we've also seen extraordinary claims made by the industry for the potential of these fuels to power America for many decades to come and produce enormous economic benefits. We decided to test some of those claims. You've probably heard that the U.S. has 100 years of natural gas thanks to fracking in the shale formations in various parts of the country, or that the U.S. is going to be perhaps oil independent, or at least the world's top oil producer for many years to come. We found that, well, first of all, what we did, one of our fellows, David Hughes, Dr. David Hughes, who's a geoscientist who worked for the Canadian Geological Survey for 30 years, he led the study. We purchased rights to data on over 63,000 currently producing horizontally drilled and hydrofractured oil and gas wells. We looked at initial production rates per well, the location of each well, the rate at which production declines. And what we found is that the assumptions behind the promises that we're hearing from the industry are not confirmed by the data. The assumptions are really based on extrapolating from the very best early wells in each of these producing formations, assuming that every well is going to produce is going to be as productive. And these are very large geographic areas covered by these formations. What we found actually is that each of these formations or plays is characterized by a small core area or sweet spot where production is pretty prolific and profitable, surrounded by much larger areas where initial production rates are lower and where production rates decline very rapidly. So if you drill a well in January, by December of the same year, the rate of production from that well has already fallen by 60, 70, or 80%. That means you have to drill and drill and drill. That's why the report was called Drill, Baby, Drill. Because if anything like the promises that are being made by the industry are going to be true, they're going to have to drill not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of oil and gas wells over the course of the coming years. We find that the economics of this are not just not suitable. It's what we will almost certainly likely see instead is a peaking of production for shale gas and tight oil well before the end of this decade, and a pretty rapid decline because of the decline rates for individual wells, and because there are only so many places to drill within these core areas. I could talk in much more detail about this, but I should mention also that more recently we have done a report specifically on the Monterey shale here in California, which is where the fracking is being proposed. Similar extraordinary claims have been made for the Monterey, that it holds 13 to 15 billion barrels of oil. The University of Southern California, on the basis of that estimation, went on to claim that if this oil is exploited, California's GDP could advance by 14%. There'd be 2.8 million jobs created, $25 billion a year in new tax revenue to the state. So this is pretty mouthwatering, I would imagine, to public officials. So once again, we decided to test the assumptions behind these reports. The assumptions were that the wells in the Monterey Formation would be similar in productivity to wells in the core areas of the Bakken and Eagle Ford plays, which are the main plays where tight oil is being produced currently with fracking. The assumptions further were that 28,000 wells would be drilled over 1,752 square miles in the Monterey.
Richard, you're answering half of my questions.
Okay, maybe I'd better stop. Just to say that we found these assumptions were not confirmed, and I'll be happy to explain why and how they were.
We'll
not
go
confirmed.
back and round
Okay.
up on that one.
Good.
Thank you. So let's begin. Just a reminder, I'd like you to keep your answer, if possible, to about 3 minutes. So Richard, you will get to answer the first question, and that would be, would you explain the concept of peak oil that we heard so much about a few years ago, and how it relates to this most recent increased amount of oil and gas extraction?
Sure. Well, what's called peak oil is really just the recognition that we're dealing with a finite resource here. And the oil and gas industry has, like all extractive industries, has always pursued the best first principle. In other words, the easiest and cheapest to access oil and gas resources were extracted first. And that means as time goes on, the industry has to invest more per unit of production. There will inevitably come a time when society just cannot subsidize in one way or another increasing rates of production. It would require too much investment capital. The price of oil or gas would be too high. There's a lot of evidence that we're in that peaking period right now. The oil and gas industry just over the last decade has doubled the rate of drilling, doubled the rate of capital investment, and yet globally actual crude oil production has been basically flat. The price of oil, of course, has quadrupled in the last 12 years, from $25 a barrel to over $100 a barrel globally. And it's these high prices that we're seeing that have incentivized the tight oil boom and also the shale gas boom, but that's a little different story. I'll stick with tight oil. It's only because prices are so high that small, risk-friendly companies have been able to go into these regions where geologists have known about these source rocks for decades, but these are sort of the last worst resources that the industry has available to it within the continental U.S. And so now that prices are high enough, geologists and engineers are assembling a suite of technologies to be able to extract oil and gas from these formations. But it's inevitably more expensive and riskier. Many of the companies are highly leveraged in the natural gas area. They're mostly making money not on actual production, but on sales of leases. There's an enormous amount of hype involved in order to keep stock prices high and in order to keep lease values high. So we see this as a short-term bubble. And it's a very highly leveraged bubble, and it's very much a Wall Street bubble as well.
Kind of a boom and bust bubble, right?
Very much so, yeah.
Briana, would you give us your perspective on the relationship between climate change and drought and fracking activity, if there is a relationship? I know that's a loaded question.
Yeah, that's a big question.
It is.
I mean, I think obviously from the broadest sense, everyone recognizes that we need to move away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible if we're going to address climate change. And so I think, from a general perspective, additional investment in fossil fuel extraction is not moving us in the right direction on climate. If we want to avoid the worst catastrophes of climate change, we need to leave a lot of that oil and gas in the ground. And so, obviously new technologies that make it possible to extract oil and gas that was not previously accessible raises concerns about climate. And obviously climate is sort of an umbrella issue for a lot of the other issues that we face in society today. Things like drought, things like water shortage. And, there's sort of a cascade of issues that are going to flow from climate change. So they are all interrelated, and it is certainly a big concern. I think one of the other things to kind of keep in mind is that the current extraction practices, so there's, a pool of oil and gas, right? There's sort of that intrinsic amount that's stored in the ground. With extraction practices that we have right now, to get out shale gas and tight oil is not that efficient, actually. The recovery factor, so the amount of oil and gas you're actually getting out of that big pool, for shale gas, it's maybe about 20%. For tight oil, it's about 5% of what's in the ground. So, like they say, we didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of rocks. And so we're, not going to leave the fossil fuel age, even though it is a finite resource. We can't afford to wait until we just run out of it. We have to be moving off of it much more quickly than that. So it's certainly a concern. The industry is never going to be content to leave those resources in the ground. They're going to continue to find ways to innovate. It is going to continue to get more expensive and more risky. But yeah, we shouldn't wait for them to run out to stop using it.
Thank you so much. This is a question that I think bears having all three of you respond to. We almost have a perfect storm. Governor Brown has declared a drought emergency. We have the oil companies poised above the Monterey Shale. The Monterey Shale is upslope from the Monterey Bay Sanctuary and from the Salinas Valley, which is the salad bowl for the state. So given those very fragile circumstances, could you comment on this situation? Just start with David.
Well, I think, our take is that we know that we're going to see more droughts like these in the future if we exacerbate climate change or if we see climate change continue. So what we're saying is that we should not be using our precious water resources, especially during a drought, but certainly in any case, to be extracting oil that we know we simply can't afford to burn if we want to actually have a safe climate in the future. So something like the drought this year and what we can expect to see in the future is just an indication of how important it is to actually move in a different direction. When we were talking about, or Briana was talking about how we need to leave oil in the ground in order to save climate change, in order to solve climate change, the International Energy Agency has said that we need to keep some 2/3 of fossil fuels that we have in proven reserves unburned if we want to address climate change effectively. That's sort of like if you had a pizza and you know that you have a whole pizza and you know that you can only eat a slice of that pizza under a healthy diet. The Monterey Shale is actually outside of that pizza. So basically, it would be like ordering another pizza. it's simply not something that you can eat. It's not something that you can dig up out of under the ground. So to us, the drought is something that really is just an indication of how serious our issues are here with fracking, and just another reason why we need to stop it in the state.
Thank you, David. Briana, what do you say about this fragile set of circumstances?
Well, I think I've, said some about it already, so I won't take up too much time. But yeah, like I said, I mean, I think, we see the interconnectedness of all these issues. We see that water is already a scarce resource and is going to continue to be an increasingly more scarce resource as climate change impacts increase. So, yeah, we also see the need to be conserving that resource, to be planning and thinking really carefully about how we're using that resource, and about moving away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. Our survival as a species sort of depends on it. So it's an incredibly significant issue.
Thank you, Richard.
A couple of weeks ago, I was on a Voice of America talk show paired with a petroleum industry spokesman talking about fracking. And I knew that the industry line is that there have been no environmental problems with fracking. But I was amazed that this person, was hewing so closely to that line. And when I was writing snake oil, I was actually really curious about this. How can the industry be so adamant that there have been no instances of water contamination as a result of fracking? And yet, on the other hand, we have so many anecdotal reports and in fact studies showing links between water contamination and fracking. And I came to the conclusion after reading a number of these scientific reports that what the industry is doing in most cases is drawing the boundaries very narrowly, so that what's being studied very often is fracking per se, which is actually only one of the elements of the whole process of drilling and casing and well completion and production and all of the 2,000 truck trips and wastewater disposal, all of these other elements of what actually is part of the whole experience of producing tight oil or shale gas are, they're sort of left off to the side. Most of the instances of groundwater contamination actually have come about through the process of wastewater disposal or improper disposal. But meanwhile, there's evidence of bad air and nosebleeds and headaches and sick pets and sick livestock and all the rest. What I think is going on is that the industry studies have been drawn so narrowly that what they're looking at is only what happens if everything is working perfectly, if all of the equipment is working exactly as it's designed to work and all of the regulations are being followed, then it's pretty safe. The risk is relatively low. Of course, if you multiply that risk over tens of thousands of wells, then yeah, sure, something's going to go wrong. But what other studies have looked at is the overall situation of what's actually happening on the ground. Operators cut corners, things go wrong, somebody goes to sleep, or somebody decides to discharge some wastewater into a local stream. And so what we actually see in the real world is human health problems and serious environmental problems accompanying frackings. And certainly water problems are some of the worst that we see.
Thank you, Richard. I recently did a survey in a number of areas advertising for people to work on these fracking sites and discovered that the average age of a personnel out on a fracking site is 24 years old, and the requirements for the job to work on the site was a high school education, driver's license, the ability to work 12-hour shifts, be a team member, and exposure to toxic fumes. So that puts a human face on who's working on the sites. Richard, this next question is for you. So fracking has been done for quite some time, probably 50 years, and the industry claims, why are you all making such a big deal about it? We've been doing fracking for years. But those of us that have taken the time to really study fracking and find out what's been going on, we know there's been some changes. Could you address the changes in fracking, some of the acidization and the other things that they're doing in fracking? And if the rest of you would like to weigh in on this question, feel free to do that.
Right. It's only been in the last decade that hydrofracturing per se has been brought together with the use of chemicals as slickening agents, as proppants, and all sorts of other things. So the chemical cocktails have been a subject of an enormous research over the past decade to find just the right chemical mixture to stimulate the wells. Also horizontal drilling brought together with hydrofracturing, again, mostly just within the last decade. And these technologies are specifically being applied to these formations, unusual formations that I was talking about earlier, what geologists typically call source rocks, formations of very low permeability where the oil and gas is there, but it just doesn't want to move. And that's why we go in with horizontal drilling and hydrofracturing and explosives to try to break up that rock of very low porosity so that some of that oil and gas will come into the well bore. And the fact that the initial production rates are pretty low compared to conventional oil wells, at least historically, and the fact that that production in each well declines very rapidly means that a lot of these wells have to be drilled in order to produce a substantial amount of oil or gas. So even if the risk is low on each individual well, what we're seeing is the multiplication of risk tens of thousands of times over.
What would you say is the average lifespan of a fracking well, both oil and gas, natural gas?
Well, it's hard to say that because we're still in the sort of early stages of many of the producing wells now have been drilled just within the last 2, 3, 4 years. Certainly, they're going to continue producing for more years, but the rate of production for each well will be declining year after year to the point where oil wells in the Bakken and Eagle Ford are producing, 3-5 barrels a day on average, sort of stripper well level production. And it just depends on the operators how long they're willing to keep that rate of production going.
This is a question for all of you. Does anybody know how many wells are being fracked in California currently? So many have gone under the radar, so I'm just wondering if you have an estimate for us, any of you.
No, unfortunately. I mean, until the passage of SB4, California wasn't tracking it in any systematic way. So, if you wanted to sit and click through every single well file that's sort of written in a very difficult to understand shorthand, unless you've worked for the oil and gas industry, and read every single file and figure out exactly which ones were fracked or acidized, then no. I mean, even when the officials from the Department of Oil and Gas and Geothermal Resources went to testify in front of the Senate, they couldn't even answer that question. So it wasn't until recently that they had to say that they were doing it, say what chemicals they were using, say how much chemicals they were using. So trying to get a handle on that is really difficult.
David?
Yeah, I mean, this is really one of the scary things about fracking across the nation, and in California in particular, is just the lack of information that we actually have on it. We don't know whether it's affecting water supplies and such because, as Briana was talking about before, the EPA has shut down some of the studies that are really looking at that. We don't know how many fracking wells there are in California because we haven't had to see that. The oil industry hasn't had to report it. They have exemptions from environmental laws that allow them to, not have to follow the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act and others. And so one of the challenges with fracking is simply the fact that it's been flying under the radar, and maybe there has been some form of it for a number of years, but as Richard was saying, that the increase in it of late is just scary because we don't have the information, because the industry, sometimes voluntarily gives up some information, but obviously you can't necessarily trust it. So, SB4 is described by some as the nation's most stringent environmental fracking law, and that's because there aren't anything else that's better. It's not because it's very stringent. It's because it's at least a minimum, right? They're making them report on it and such, and there's going to be a study. So that's a challenge that I think you highlight pretty well.
Thank you, David. This question is also for you. The oil and gas industry claims that the benefits from natural gas and oil extraction far outweigh the risks involved, that the benefits of income to a region and jobs far outweigh any of these risks we're talking about. What would you say about that?
Yeah, that's their constant line, and I think I should be practiced in responding to it. I think you can start with the basic level of the fact that we've seen throughout history that extractive industries create challenges for communities across the globe. We're seeing it in North Dakota where, yes, there may be jobs, but there's also crime and there's also other really negative impacts. You can see that in places like Nigeria, of course, and other places where the oil industry has come in and oil and gas industry has come in and really wrecked communities and wrecked countries because of their sort of extractive practices. But from another level, the climate impacts of continued reliance on oil and gas is just really something that we can't fathom. We know that we need to be turning in a different direction immediately. We should have turned in that direction 20 years ago. And the idea that, some temporary jobs to help frack oil out of the ground is just simply not comparable to the impacts of climate change should we continue along the path that we're coming down. So, I think when the industry says it's going to be creating jobs in a community or it's going to be bringing economic vitalization into a community, I think you need to look at the longer term and recognize that, a very short-term job growth is not going to be in the long-term interests of our communities and of the planet. And, as the PCI report says, a lot of those numbers are totally inflated. We've seen this with respect to other projects like the Keystone XL pipeline, but, you can't really trust the industry to put out their jobs figures because we know a lot of times they're just simply not realistic.
Thank you. Briana is a geologist, and I'm going to ask you, Briana, is there any evidence of seismicity due to hydraulic fracturing?
There is, yeah. So it's actually been recognized for a really long time that anytime you inject fluids underground, or for that matter, when you pull fluids from the underground, you can cause earthquakes. It's called induced seismicity. California is actually home to some of the biggest incidences of induced seismicity, not from injection, but from extraction. It's been several decades since that happened, and they figured out, oh, whoops, if we're taking something out, we better put something back in to take the place of it. But there have now been at least two confirmed, one suspected case where the actual hydraulic fracturing itself has caused earthquakes that are big enough to be felt at the surface. One was in the UK. One was in Oklahoma. That's the one where it's suspected but not necessarily confirmed. The other one was in Canada. The bigger problem, the bigger risk is the injection of the wastewater. The reason is, it's a scientific relationship that's been demonstrated empirically. There's a strong correlation between the amount of fluid you're injecting and how long you're injecting it and how big an earthquake you can cause. So since those wastewater wells are injecting more fluid over a longer period of time, they are the bigger risk for causing earthquakes. And we've seen that across the country. There's been a big spike of felt earthquakes in the middle of the country, which doesn't typically experience a lot of natural seismicity. The U.S. Geological Survey is investigating that, but their hypothesis is that it's linked to oil and gas. We've seen it in Texas, Oklahoma, Ohio. There have been earthquakes big enough to be felt at the surface. In one case, the one in Oklahoma, if it was confirmed, it's now the biggest earthquake that's been caused by injection. It was a magnitude 5.7 earthquake. In that case, it actually caused damage to homes. It caused injury. And so, that's sort of the risk, obviously, that we're worried about with this. Californians are no strangers to earthquakes, obviously. It can be property damage. It can cause injuries. The other worry is that you're actually going to damage the wells themselves, and that's going to cause problems. In the case of the UK, the wells that the hydraulic fracturing there caused induced seismicity. It actually, so the casing that they put into the well, that sort of seals off the well bore is typically circular. That earthquake's actually caused an ovalization of the casing. It basically squished it over several hundred feet of the well bore. Now they're claiming that no problem, that didn't compromise the integrity of the well, no big whoop. They didn't provide any data to actually confirm that or to be able to independently confirm that it didn't cause a problem, but that's another concern, is that you're actually, by causing this induced seismicity, actually going to be creating pathways to be contaminating groundwater. So it is a concern. Unfortunately, most states don't address it at all. One of the other consequences of hydraulic fracturing being exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act is that it's not covered under the Underground Injection Control Program. Any other fluids that you want to inject underground in the United States, you have to get a permit from the EPA, not when it comes to hydraulic fracturing. And that exemption has also sort of obviously influenced the way it's regulated. While not all classes of wells have to consider induced seismicity risk when they're being sited, some of them do. Unfortunately, the oil and gas industry has again gotten themselves special treatment. So when it comes to these wastewater disposal wells, what are called Class 2 wells, they don't have to consider seismic risk when they're siting those wells, when they're operating those wells. It's not even a factor, and that's something obviously we think needs to be changed.
David.
Yeah, I was really struck by some news reports coming out of Texas where city council held a hearing, or I guess some government agency held a hearing, and I think it was over 100 concerned Texas residents came out to talk about felt earthquakes and concerns about earthquakes from fracking. And, if you're hearing from Texans who are used to the oil industry, sort of having their way in a lot of ways, there's a problem there.
Thank you. So Senate Bill 4, this is a question for all three of you. State Senator Fran Pavley crafted Senate Bill 4 as a result of a lot of public outcry and such an increased amount of activity among the oil industries, and it's been amended and it's been changed. It's been very controversial. It is intended to put in a permitting process, oversight process to reveal the chemicals that are being used, and to also notify neighbors when people are living nearby. And so in many countries of the world, the precautionary principle becomes part of law with regard to protection of its citizens. Does Senate Bill 4 address the precautionary principle sincerely? And that's for all three of you, and I'll start with you, Richard.
Well, no, it doesn't. One could argue that it's certainly better than nothing. It's good that we can know what the chemicals are that are being used in fracking. It's good that wells have to be individually permitted. But there's so much more that we really need to do to safeguard residents, wildlife, livestock, human health from the whole fracking process. And if we were following the precautionary principle, we would just stop. We would institute a moratorium until we were sure that we had this under control, and it's certainly not the case now. It's the industry practice currently, when something does go wrong, just to make payouts to the people impacted and then make them sign a non-disclosure agreement. That's certainly very far from a precautionary principle approach.
Thank you. Briana.
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately the political situation at the time was such that, there wasn't a lot of opportunity to apply the precautionary principle, unfortunately. There were a number of moratorium bills that were introduced. They never got off the floor. So I think SB4 was a recognition of the fact that, there are people and communities who are living with this now who need help and need additional protection. And a moratorium, unfortunately, wasn't going to get passed last year. And so SB4 was an attempt to provide some, at least basic protections for these people who are living with it now, who don't have the ability to say, no, don't do this in my backyard. And so in that sense, it does mandate a study, which we think is great and important. Unfortunately, obviously, the precautionary principle would say do that study before you start doing this, but it's happening now. People are living with it now, and so SB4, while unfortunately doesn't go nearly far enough in instituting protections, at least starts to provide some of just the very basics of what we need to help reduce impacts.
David?
Yeah, I'd agree. SB4, in my view, is not in line with the precautionary principle. That's why we are still advocating for a moratorium and actually, in fact, a ban on fracking. And that's why we're calling on the governor to do that, because we feel that the legislation itself simply allows fracking to continue while the study is being done, and that's just not acceptable. More broadly, as I've said before, we actually think that fracking for oil in California, we already know that it's something that we shouldn't be doing. The precautionary principle, in my view, we've already taken the sort of precautionary measures to understand how climate change works, and the fact that we can't afford to burn the oil in the Monterey that would be fracked would imply to me that we should be banning it. But in any event, SB4, our view is that, it doesn't go far enough to safeguard our communities from the issue.
Thank you. And my last question is to all three of you, and I think the audience will be very interested in this question and your answer. Do you think the statewide activism that has been taking place of late has affected our policymakers? And I'll ask Mark Levine that as well. So please, let's start with you, Richard.
Well, yes, I think so, but I don't have much to base that on, quite frankly. And maybe I'm not a good person to answer that question in any detail.
Briana?
I would say unquestionably. I was up in Sacramento today at the Green California Summit, and this was a topic of conversation there as well. The environmental community, obviously we're not monolithic, and different groups have different ideas about what should be done. And there were a lot of different measures that were being passed last year, or a lot of different measures that were being pushed for last year. But the environmental community has really all come together this year to push for a moratorium. And the grassroots groups and the communities who are pushing for bans and pushing for moratoria have unquestionably, I think, changed the political calculus on this issue. Governor Brown a couple of years ago was saying something like, forget about it. Like, no way, I wouldn't even consider it. Don't even ask. And now, we're at the point now where he, is actually talking about it. And I think the same thing with members of the Assembly and members of the Senate. People who wouldn't even have considered it before, are sponsoring bills. So, we as the environmental community, can bug those guys all we want, and they are free to ignore us as much as they want, but they can't ignore their constituents. And so the pressure from the community, I think, has unquestionably changed this issue and brought it to the forefront.
David?
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. I've been working on environmental campaigns for a little while now, and I have to say that even just the past few months of working on or working with colleagues on fracking here has been really amazing and really exciting to see the sort of groundswell of support for ending fracking in California from people that I've met people in this room through working on fracking in California and trying to push our governor and our assembly to put a stop to it. Governor Brown is definitely paying attention and noticing. He's talked to some folks and complaining about the people that are greeting him at every single stop that he makes, telling him to put a stop on fracking. We were outside of the drought declaration. We were up at the state of the state. I'm sure there are going to be people down in LA where he's there tomorrow. I'm sure there's going to be people basically every place that he goes. And it's really exciting. And I think it's really starting to galvanize a pretty exciting movement in California. And we're excited because we've got a big thing coming up in March. And March 15th, we're going to be bringing thousands of people to Sacramento. Hopefully many of you will be there too, to really show how strong and how big of a movement there is to ban fracking in California or stop fracking in California.
Thank you, distinguished panel. You've been a great panel. Let's give them a hand. And this is a perfect segue for Nancy to introduce Assemblyman Mark Levine.
And thank you, Kristen. Great job. Well, I see Mark has arrived. Thank you. We're pleased to have Assemblymember Mark Levine, who represents the 10th Assembly District, which includes Marin County and southern Sonoma County. Assemblymember Levine is a former San Rafael City Council member who has held leadership positions at the local level. His priorities include investing in K through 12 and higher education, creating and retaining jobs, protecting the environment, promoting clean energy, and creating a sustainable budget. Assemblymember Levine is the vice chair of the Assembly Local Government Committee and chair of the Select Committee on Agriculture and the Environment. So, Mark, do you want to come on up and tell us about what you're doing about a moratorium?
It's great to be here. I am so impressed with this crowd. I just drove back from Sacramento where we had session, and it actually rained there today. So I was hoping it rained down here, but I heard it didn't. So we'll keep praying for that. Thank you, Nancy, for your kind remarks, and thanks to the forum for putting this together. And I think congratulations, not just for all of you who made it here today, but of course also the class members here tonight. All of the classes from the Environmental Forum of Marin, you've played such a crucial role just in everything that we've done in this county for a generation or more, and have been leaders in educating so many of us about the environment. Supporting the environment, it goes without saying, is of the utmost importance to us here in Marin County, and your advocacy helps make us all aware of the environmental dangers and what we can do to protect our precious natural resources. One such threat, and we've heard a little bit about that today or tonight, is fracking. And I'd like to talk to you about this terrible practice, about injecting toxic chemicals into our ground to extract oil. Fracking poses a significant threat to the environment. We've heard that tonight, to public health and safety, to our precious and limited water supply, and of course, as we heard, seismic activity. I've led the fight for a ban on fracking here in California, and until we have much more research and data on its effects of the oil drilling practice and others like acid matrix stimulation, we must ban fracking altogether. There is currently no safe level of fracking at all. And last year, I was very proud to vote for AB 1323 by then Assemblywoman Holly Mitchell, which was a moratorium on fracking. Unfortunately, I was one of only 24 votes out of a body of 80 for this moratorium. And let me put this into some type of a way to understand what 24 votes means. Democrats have a supermajority. 55 members of the state assembly are Democrats. So this isn't what you would expect, right? This is something that should be easy to do something about. And it is an incredibly vexing and challenging political environment that I think any of us would go to Sacramento and think, wow, how on earth is this okay with your communities back at home? And so when we talk about, how difficult it is to do these things, that's an example of it. There's a lot more work to be done, and the fight for the moratorium continues. I think it's because of your efforts. I think because people are getting more engaged, that they're saying SB4 wasn't enough. That doesn't mean that we stop fighting. It means that the fight continues. That is working. Your speaking out is working. And being loud about it gets policymakers to listen. Holly Mitchell is now a senator, and I miss her in the assembly, but I'm glad that she's over in the smaller house, as we call it, because there's only 40 of them over there. And she is, again, pushing for a moratorium on fracking. I'm proud to have been asked to co-author that and lead the charge in the assembly this year that I will champion. Hopefully it will make it through the Senate. Also, earlier this month, I led efforts to call on Governor Brown to enforce a moratorium by executive order. It's within his ability to do that, and that's what we asked. Thank you. So I had my press conference at 10 o'clock the morning that we did it, and prior to 9 a.m. as I was walking into the Capitol, I had the governor's legislative liaison calling me on my cell phone saying, "Mr. Levine, what are you doing? This is really agitating the governor." So we're getting his attention, and it's a good thing. And of course I said, "No, you can call me Mark." I was excited on this initiative to work with Credo Action on it. They worked with me to make sure that we got a lot of attention, but also to build grassroots support for the call for the moratorium. We were able to get nearly 30,000 Californians to sign the petition in support of the letter that I authored that was signed by 8 of my colleagues in the state assembly, and I was very proud to have all of them join me after the very difficult floor fights we had on the moratorium bills. 30,000 Californians agree and believe that we've waited too long to stop fracking. 30,000 Californians believe that the risks are simply too great to not continue fighting against it. And 30,000 Californians signed the petition with a clear message that enough is enough, and we need to end fracking now. Seeing all the grassroots energy around this issue has gotten the attention of other members. I even had a member tonight explain to me why, for good or bad, why she didn't want to sign the letter that we wrote. But she made the very point that my letter made. After SB 4, why wait a year? Put a moratorium in place now. We don't have the data we need to go ahead and know what's going on and how this is going to affect our environment. And I think that because of your efforts and the efforts of Californians across the state, we're going to be getting more legislators' attention on this issue. So with your energy and enthusiasm, we can solve this crisis. And part of that is ensuring that communities are educated and that they're informed, that they can hold and make sure that people are aware of this fight and how it keeps going. I urge you to continue. I need your support. I can't do it alone. Thank you.
We're playing musical chairs. At the forum, I mentioned earlier, we talk a lot about education for action and advocates for the natural world. And I mentioned Main Street Moms being here tonight along with 350marin.org. So we're going to give them a few minutes just to tell you about what they're up to. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who's coming up, and then we'll let them take over. Kathy Calloway, who will be joining Kristen up here, to talk about Main Street Moms' efforts. Kathy started with Main Street Moms in 2004 with their first big letter writing campaign. She fell in love with all the other women there in regards to their passion and their dedication, and so she's been working with them ever since and doing an amazing job. She is their unofficial sign maker, and you're doing a great job on that. And as Kathy says, advocacy is an addiction. Activism is an addiction. After Kathy and Kristen talk to you about Main Street Moms, Ken Jones is going to come up to talk to you about 350marin.org and what their efforts are. Ken is a Democratic Party delegate for this district, and in that capacity is an active member of the Environmental Caucus and Progressive Caucus. On the steering committee of both 350 Bay Area and 350 Marin, he started 350 Marin's Stop Fracking campaign. He's a co-facilitator of Progressive Democrats of America's National Shop Stop Global Warming Act. I gotta wear my glasses, Jesus. The Stop Global Warming Information Organizing Team as well. He retired early so that he could work on climate change. Thank you for that, Ken. Fracking's role in it has become a full-time job. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to let them take over the podium. Why don't we start with Kathy and Kristen?
You want to go first? You go ahead. I'm getting a lot of FaceTime up here with you guys tonight. Well, I'll just say this about activism and being an advocate. It starts with either being for or against something. So whether you're a mom, Main Street mom, or whether you're a mom against drug driving, or you're a dad for binge drinking, whatever you're for or against. Did you understand that? It's really important to inform yourself about the facts. And base your activism on true knowledge. And there are a number of ways to do that. There are a number of groups, and there's so much information out there. And then once you do that, it's important to take your beliefs and collaborate or coalesce with other like-minded people, because then you have much more of an impact. And then once you coalesce and collaborate, then you show up to meetings, you write letters, you make phone calls, and you don't give up. And that's my advice to you. Kathy.
I know that everybody has questions, so I'm going to keep this as short as I can. Just to let you know that in 2004, the Main Street Moms was formed at a kitchen table in Bolinas by 3 young mothers who were concerned about the world that their children would be inheriting. At first, MOB, M-M-O-B, stood for Main Street Moms Oppose Bush, and thus the first letter writing campaign was launched, and over 500,000 personal letters with registration forms and voting information were sent to unregistered women. We were helped by a growing group of concerned citizens and family and friends to get these letters out, and although the outcome of the election didn't go as hoped, the effort did result in a committed group of women in West Marin meeting every Monday and ready to take on more projects. We did become a 501c3, so now we work nonpartisanly and on many issues. And if you go to our website, mainstreet.moms, you can read up some of the things that we did work on. I won't go into all of them in detail about election integrity and the poll workers for democracy and Leave My Child Alone, but which actually had to do with No Child Left Behind, their military recruitment on school campuses. We were trying to fight. But what I want to touch on is what MOB has been involved with for a number of years on environmental issues. We began our signature Soup and Solutions events out in Point Reyes a number of years ago. They're free events serving soup and bread with speakers, sometimes films, and public discussion. Our countless pots of soup, vegetarian, usually vegan, this is Marin, have helped to inform and engage our local communities, often with action-to-go postcards that we hand out for people to fill in and send to the appropriate people that we want to have them listen up to us. When the late Charles McGlashan came to speak with us about his dream of Marin Clean Energy, we jumped on board, energized by our founder, Megan Matson, whose enthusiasm and brilliance kept us going forward. We worked hard and were thrilled when his dream came true. We still work to encourage people to sign up for their deep green option. In 2012, we were awarded the Charles McGlashan Advocacy Award for our labors. The MOB has spent the last year or so working to stop the Keystone Pipeline and the practice of hydraulic fracturing. We've traveled around the Bay Area, gone to Salinas, Sacramento, testifying at hearings and participating in rallies, all calling for a moratorium on fracking. These efforts have given us the opportunity to work with even more of the dedicated and devoted environmental organizations like Credo, Oil Change, 350.org, 350 Marin. But in this digital world of social media, the Main Street Moms we contribute our own distinctive style of engagement. Some of our members don't use computers. Many of them don't travel much further than West Marin. But we all care with a passion to make a difference, to contribute to the common good, and secure a more viable future for our children. We can write personal letters, come up with handmade signs in a flash, turn Christmas carols into anti-fracking songs, sing them on the radio, stand on the sidewalk handing out homemade cookies and asking for a signature or just a one-on-one conversation. Knowing that our lives are busy, we are a guilt-free organization, and we just try to take on little bite-sized actions so that we don't feel overwhelmed by our concerns and that we feel that we are involved. We like to engage people with visuals as well as edibles, believing that the ripple in the pond is an apt metaphor, and that we as individuals still have the power to influence, even if it's just one other person. So we have our visuals, real quickly. We have bumper stickers. I have several over in the basket, not a ton of those. And what we do is we carry around these little quarter-page handouts. This is the one on fracking. So that when you are talking to someone and they kind of go, oh, why is this button on your sleeve? You can give them the information. It give Jerry's telephone number, the whole thing, get them going. And then they go, oh, why do you have these strange bracelets on your wrist? And I'll say, oh, have you called Jerry today? And so this is Jerry's telephone number in case you need it, 916-445-2841. And I have more of those over there. If any of you want to do a little fashion statement, you can pick one up. And then we also have, oh, you showed them, yes. Our signs that we go to organize. This is a nice transportable sign. And we have about a dozen of these. So when you see the circle signs, you know the mob is there. And that's all. Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to thank and acknowledge Richard Gray for bringing the model of the oil rig, which is out in front of the building. Thank you, Richard. And Ken from 350.org, would you come up and tell us how you do your thing?
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to say that again, that the signs out there are all Richard Gray's, and he's our Stop Fracking Committee artist, fractivist. So 350 Marin is part of 350 Bay Area, which is, both groups have been inspired by 350.org, but they're somewhat separate. 350.org is the international group, and we're the group in the Bay Area, basically, that represents a lot of the ideas expressed by Bill McKibben. So where we come from on the fracking issue is pretty much on the climate change aspects of it, which not as many people talk about that as much as they do about the water, the possible wastewater, the earthquakes. There's a lot of problems with fracking, which we all know about in 350 Bay Area, but we focus on the climate change ones because AB 32, the cap and trade system, set up Executive Order S0305 that Schwarzenegger passed that set limits on greenhouse gas emissions. That seems like a good leverage point for our governor. We have a great group, and it's growing rapidly. 350 Bay Area is over 6,000 now, and 350 Marin, I think we're up to about 500 people that we send out emails to. But we need your help, and that's why we're here tonight, and hopefully you'll pick up some of our material and perhaps sign up. I'd like to just say a little what we've been doing, what we've done lately in terms of the last legislative session. First of all, a number of us in 350 Bay Area were delegates, and we went up and lobbied or challenged the Environmental Caucus with a huge group of new members that all decided that we wanted a very strong resolution passed by the Democratic Party, not a weaker one like was planned. And R.L. Miller, who had been a blog person on Daily Coast and was well known across the country, was deciding she wanted to be chair of the Environmental Caucus, and she got a couple of people, very strong vice chairs, and it was just a avalanche of people signing up at the last minute to vote for her. Nobody had ever seen that happen at a convention before. It was, you couldn't even get in the door. There were so many people. That was the single issue, probably except for maybe cannabis, that got the most support. But also, we were also lobbying the governor. 350 Bay Area had more than, I think, 10 people going up with the Center for Biological Diversity interns to lobby right at the point when the Appropriations Committee had to pass the moratoria bill onto the floor or not. It's where it usually dies, is in the Appropriations Committee. So we did a very good job of lobbying it. It did get to the floor, but there was a moment when it disappeared for about 2 or 3 days, and the governor and the speaker, I guess, decided that the chair of the Appropriations Committee should gut that bill. So when Assemblyman Levine said he's one of the 24 that voted for it, it was a gutted bill. And so some of the people who abstained probably just saw how bad it was, and they just said, well, what's the point? But it is tough to pass a moratorium bill, and we're going to continue to work very hard on that in the legislature for the one bill that is now supported by all environmental groups. And we are working together with Californians Against Fracking. We're one of about 170 groups. I don't think NRDC is one of them. I would like them to join sometime. But one of the things that we did do right around the time that bill was also going through the Appropriations Committee was we helped usher, but not anything to do with writing. That was done by Leslie Alden and Kate Sears' office, the County Board of Supervisors resolution to call for a moratorium on fracking. It was the first county in the state to pass a resolution like that, and it was so well written that it was an educational piece, and it was a model for other resolutions around the state, and even stimulated, I think, some people to talk about ordinances. And I do have copies of it up here. I don't have enough for everybody, but should you want them. In terms of what we're going to be doing, we have been bird dogging the governor. We're going to continue to do that, and we'd love you to help us. We continuing fracking, No Fracking Way Monday call in to the governor, and we are increasingly more involved in stopping the huge oil infrastructure build out in the Bay Area that's planned for the fracked oil to come in. We have a Coastal Commission meeting on February 12th that we're attending, and we're hope to get the Coastal Commission to pass some very strong, they need to take action on the drilling, the fracking that's going on in the Santa Barbara Channel. We need to strengthen their power to pass fines as well. And lastly, we have a March 15th rally and protest that was mentioned where buses are going to come from all over the state. We're doing an Adopt a Bus plan where we're going to have people contribute enough money to pay for a bus that might come up from the Central Valley, because a lot of them can't afford it like we can here in Marin. And also we have a film festival that we're planning that's coming up soon that will be on fracking and climate change, and there are lots of other things I could mention, but I was given the 1 minute time, so thank you.
Okay, now comes the fun time when everybody's going to get a chance to ask questions or whatever they want to do. Greg is turning the lectern around, and what we're going to try to do to keep this moving as easily as possible, if you have any questions or comments, we're going to ask you to line up over in the side aisle over here, and then just work your way up to the podium to ask your question. We ask you please be brief. We're going to allow 30 minutes for this if that's what's needed, so we will keep an eye on the clock. We're 10 minutes behind schedule, but we've been kind of that all along, so we're on schedule. How's that? So again, if you want to line up on the side aisle over here for any of your questions, and the panel is waiting to hear from you. Thank you. Better put that back.
Hi. If I looked at the big picture of how this stuff fits together, it seems like a weak link in it all is water use. And if I had a business proposition where I was going to use 1% of California's water to do anything. It would seem that that would be quite tricky and hard to do given the way that water rights work in California and how water law works. I would just like you to kind of describe how one goes about getting that kind of amounts of water in California. What's the mechanism for doing it? It can't be just laying cash on the table based on all the other kind of forces that are at work, and the cost of buying that water on the open market must be prohibitive relative to the finances of operating these wells, which have declining production. So I don't understand all those pieces. Hopefully one of you guys does. Thank you.
It sure sounds like that's a good question. I mean, I think, one thing that I would say, not knowing the intricacies of water policy in California per se, is that the oil industry, anywhere that it goes, has a massive amount of influence on policy. And so I'm sure that somewhere, somehow, the industry was able to get some sort of preferential treatment or something that allows them to use the water that they're using. This is all conjecture, of course, but knowing the way that the industry works, that's something that I would not be surprised by.
Yeah, I think the question really raises an opportunity to build support for a moratorium and ultimately a ban. Over 80% of the state's water is used by agriculture. It's an amazing number, how high that is. And I think what we're hearing now with the drought that everyone, finally has recognized we have, is that, agriculture is going to be doing with a whole lot less. Livestock is going to be doing with a whole lot less. And they may be allies in making sure that, fracking doesn't get access to the limited water supply that agriculture has been depending upon.
I believe there are a number of ways that the energy industries are accessing water. One of the more common ways, and I can only say this from being a Californian, the majority of fracking is being done in our Central Valley around Kern County and San Joaquin County. And very often they will go to a farm and ask a farmer to buy their well water, or they will frack on their land and use the water that would have been intended for agriculture on that farm and use it in that case. I know that in Mexico they're buying aquifers and well water from poor farmers who can't stay on their land anymore. So that's my comment on it.
If you could explain or just address the Cheney-Halliburton loophole.
So yeah, in 2005, when they passed the Energy Policy Act, there was something in there that's referred to as the Halliburton loophole. Basically what they did, as I was talking about before, basically anytime you want to inject something underground in the United States, you need a permit from the Environmental Protection Agency. In the 80s, they recognized that injecting fluids underground is a risk to drinking water, and they created a program called the Underground Injection Control Program. And that regulates the majority of underground injections in the country, from hazardous waste to septic systems. In 2005, got to give the industry credit, I guess, for foresight. They started to think, hey, what we're doing is a lot like underground injection. And there was nothing in the Safe Drinking Water Act that explicitly said that hydraulic fracturing was or was not regulated. So what they managed to insert into the Safe Drinking Water Act is they actually excluded hydraulic fracturing from the definition of underground injection. So the law now says underground injection is et cetera, except it is not the injection of fluids pursuant to hydraulic fracturing. And with that, they exempted themselves from the Safe Drinking Water Act.
And the other little piece of that, of course, is that this exemption was proposed by then Vice President Dick Cheney, who prior to being vice president had been an executive with Halliburton Corporation, one of the world's largest oil services companies. So that sort of closes the loop.
And just not to be a broken record, but in the lead up to the energy bill and these proposals, the oil industry met with the White House numerous times in closed door meetings to talk about the bill. And I was working in D.C. at the time, and I know that the environmental groups had one meeting as opposed to, I think it was over a dozen or dozens of meetings with the energy industry. So they essentially wrote the Energy Policy Act of 2005 to a large extent. So hence the name.
I'm concerned about the right of the mineral companies and oil companies to go on anyone's property and extract what's underneath, even if the property owner doesn't give permission. Is there any hope of that changing?
Well, I can say something briefly about that. That situation she's referring to is something called split estate. The United States is the only country in the world where mineral rights can be privately held. And at various points in the past, those rights have often been severed from the surface rights. So it means that one person owns the surface of the land, but someone else owns the minerals beneath them. The other issue is that the mineral estate in this country is the dominant estate. And most laws say that you are, as the mineral owner, are allowed to do whatever is reasonably necessary to access those minerals. And that includes coming onto the surface property that you don't own, putting a well there, putting facilities there, and that's just sort of unfortunately, the way the property laws are in the United States. It kind of sounds un-American, but that's sort of how it's evolved. And as far as the prospects of changing that, I can't comment.
Incidentally, because other countries, in other countries, the subsurface rights are owned by the government, there's much less incentive for citizens to support the practice of fracking in other countries because they would receive no direct benefit in terms of lease money or royalty money from actual production on their land. So this is why we're seeing, of course, there's a lot of public opposition to fracking in this country, but it's muted, especially in poor communities that are often targeted by drillers because the people need the money from leases and royalties. But in other countries, that incentive is not there, and so there's even more public opposition in places like the UK, where there's a tremendous push right now for fracking, and also tremendous opposition from the public.
Hi. Richard, you gave me hope when I first heard you speak about the end of oil, that there was a finite supply and people wouldn't pay an infinite amount. And I thought this fracking was blowing a hole into that, but you're giving me hope again. However, we are told that the price of gas has gone down because of fracking. Is that not true? And also, I read about some enormous supply that I think has something to do with fracking somewhere in the vicinity of Japan, where they're building the world's largest ship to get at it. That was an article in the Atlantic magazine. Did you see that one?
Right. Yeah, well, gasoline prices in the U.S. Fluctuate depending upon a lot of factors, including refinery outputs and inputs and so on. Generally, price of oil in the U.S. is a little bit lower than the international price, but it has almost nothing to do directly with fracking. Fracking has not actually lowered oil prices in the United States. It's had almost no influence.
Or natural gas?
Natural gas prices have fallen because of fracking, because producers have produced so much so fast in order to maintain their leases. and their stock values. They overproduced, and as a result actually drove natural gas prices down below the price of production, the cost of production. So most natural gas producers who are producing by fracking right now are actually losing money on production. So many of these companies, like, for example, Chesapeake, which is the largest single company producing shale gas, has not made a profit on natural gas production in any of the last 10 years, and yet they remain a profitable company largely by hyping the prospect of future production, which keeps the lease values high, and then they sell leases off to other companies, including larger companies, the majors like Chevron, and also foreign companies. So it's very much a confidence game.
Oh, I forgot to segue. My other question is, what is the price at which people won't pay anymore?
Well, we saw that in 2008 when the price of oil went up to almost $150 a barrel. And within a few months, it had plummeted to the 30s. It was a period of incredible volatility in the oil industry. And the result of that was a lot of projects. When the price fell, a lot of projects were canceled. Investors pulled back from tar sands and other expensive sources, and then of course with supplies starting to contract, then the price ratcheted back up to $100 a barrel, and at this price, it's just high enough to keep most of these marginal operations going: tar sands, tight oil, deep water oil, and so on. But it's also just high enough to keep the economy from really being able to recover. It's an oil price that is really constraining the overall economy.
Just to say one thing on that, I mean, I think the economics of oil and understanding when different projects can come online is incredibly important, and it's really driving a lot of the economy and such. But what we're talking about is a need faster than the economics may force it to get off of oil. We're talking about a need to get off of fossil fuels in a time frame that we need to have government incentives to do so. We need to have government policies put into place to move us away from these fossil fuels. And so, when you're thinking about the different economics behind why the industry is moving in one direction or the other, it really, to me, paints a picture of really a need for policies from the government to really move us in a new direction and stop incentivizing through subsidies and otherwise these fossil fuels that are bringing us climate disruption.
You may have answered my question. I'm just curious. It seems the need for fuel is a national issue. And there's probably states that are wealthier in that regard than others. And I'm wondering what pressure or what incentives are being given to Governor Brown. What's he up against from a federal standpoint? Is the federal government pressuring certain states to participate in fracking, and is that something that we need to overcome? I'm just curious.
That's a really interesting question. When we talk about SB4, for example, I mean, where it's completely imperfect, but it's something, and Briana really spoke well to it as, if it's happening next door to your home, should you be able to know about it? Or if your child got sick, should the chemicals be disclosed? That is not true for federal land in California. So most of the fracking, we've got a lot in Kern County. I actually went down to Kern County. I was invited by the assembly member there to tour some of those areas, and the media found out because we wanted them to know, and then they canceled the tour. So but most of the fracking is going to be occurring on federal lands where California's laws are not applicable. Which is very frightening and, kind of shows us some of the limitations of what even the legislature can do. But there are some other things to kind of take some pressure off of our reliance on fossil fuels and, our oil-based economy, where I'm very grateful that the governor signed my bill that would help create electric vehicle infrastructure throughout the state of California. And Maryland looks like they're going to be taking my bill as a model for that state as well. And so there are, thank you. There are pathways off of oil, but we need to encourage the policies that would promote that future for California.
Is part of Governor Brown's frustration in supporting no fracking due to revenue source from the fracking that we don't know exists somewhere in California? Second part of that.
Much of his motivation does come from promises of economic benefits to the state that have been made by the industry itself and by the study I mentioned earlier from University of Southern California. What we found in our study was that there is very little basis for those claims. As I mentioned earlier, 14% boost in California GDP, 2.8 million jobs, $25 billion a year in new tax revenues. Though that's a big incentive for Governor Brown to want fracking in the state. Now, as it turns out, there's almost no likelihood of those things actually happening, but you can see the strategy of the oil and gas industry to want to make us believe that those things are true.
Okay, more specifically then, is the current revenue, the balancing of the current budget, is that in part due to the revenues from fracking?
There isn't any plan for any revenue from fracking. One of the biggest problems is, of course, the governor is also opposed to an oil extraction tax in California. So, Alaska does it, Texas does it, every major oil-producing state taxes the extraction of.
We had it.
No. And so this is an incredibly difficult issue for us, of course, as we've gone through some very lean years, and we're looking to rebuild a lot of the services and investment in infrastructure and higher education and social services in California. The reticence on the part of the governor to be supportive of an oil extraction tax. There is, of course, a fear that we could be addicted to an oil extraction tax, which would have its own problem long term. But it's lost on me how Alaska and Texas can do it, and California hasn't had the political will to pass it.
I'm sorry. I had it confused, I think, with the federal tax. There is a federal tax, right? Extraction tax collected from California oil extraction. We were in Congress one year when Barbara Boxer was fighting the Senate to claim the revenues that were due from Standard Oil extracting oil from Southern California. And this is years ago.
Just one thing on the extraction tax or the severance tax. You're right. We have to be careful not to become addicted to it and use it to fund things at an ongoing level. But it does right now actually subsidize the industry that they aren't having to pay that. And so it's a way of almost incentivizing or at least reducing the cost of the industry to do the work here or their extraction here. One other piece just in terms of revenues that I would throw out there, and this is something that we, as I said, track a lot, and that's revenues in terms of campaign contributions, in terms of political contributions from the industry. I think the Post-Carbon Institute's report about what the reality is likely to be with respect to the economics of the oil industry in California is incredibly important. But the Post-Carbon Institute isn't giving $1 million to Proposition 30 like the oil industry did. They're not giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to Governor Brown's reelection campaign or things like that. And so they don't necessarily have the same sort of access that those sorts of dollars give to the oil industry in California as well as in the U.S. Congress. So when we're thinking about why the governor might be willing to accept the industry's word for it, I think you have to look at what sort of contributions he's receiving from them as well.
Hi, I'm Bill Carney with Sustainable San Rafael. I have to say that every time I get up here, as Mark remembers. But so I've got a question on the metrics of climate change, and particularly the metrics of the greenhouse gas emissions represented by all of this oil and gas that fracking is going to put into the atmosphere. How does that relate to California's Global Warming Solutions Act? We have as a state an 80% reduction goal in 3.5 decades from now. So we're heading down in terms of the greenhouse gases that we are aiming to emit, at the same time that we're encountering this huge uptick in actual release of greenhouse gases if we don't, in fact, say as Californians we're going to keep this stuff in the ground and set an example for the rest of the country and the rest of the world in doing that. So I'd be curious in your thoughts about that nexus.
Well, obviously, we can't reduce our CO2 emissions by 80% if we're increasing the rate of extraction of fossil fuels in any form. Fortunately, right now, in one sense, California is on the right track inadvertently. California's oil production reached its maximum back in 1982 at about 1.1 million barrels a day, and it's fallen to about 500,000 barrels a day. So simple depletion is kind of helping us do the right thing in that sense, but it's as David said, it's by far not enough to achieve the reductions in CO2 emissions that are actually required if we're going to do anything about climate change.
I'd just say one thing, and that's climate leaders don't frack. I was trying to explain this before, and I think I sort of muffed it a little bit, but, scientists have said that we have to keep, a massive amount of the oil that we already know exists in, oil companies' holdings or reserves underground. And the idea that we would extract oil in California that is not even within that calculation. It's outside of that whole calculation. It's beyond what scientists say we should even consider possibly digging up if we want to avoid climate change. It's just simply, it's irrational. It would be denying the science of climate change to dig this stuff up.
There was an effort, very little known, but I think this community would be interested to know, to raise the renewable portfolio standard for California to 51%, and so that unfortunately is not going. That bill is not going to be successful for this month. There may be another bill as the sessions go. Tomorrow is the last day to get a bill out of the Assembly for last year's session. But in February is a new deadline for new bills. So it was unsuccessful to get that bill out to the 51% level, but perhaps the author will continue working with stakeholders to figure out if they could gain support for a higher RPS in California.
I'd just like to say that I'm glad someone brought up the AB 32, because this is something that any of you can do, because we brought this up at the Department of Conservation hearings, asking, how this is going to be justified. And you all can just send a little postcard or call this number and really bring this up, because this is an important point. How are you going to achieve the requirements of AB 32 with this kind of activity? So it's a really good point, and it's a brief one, and you can make it real fast in under a minute. Give them a call.
Good evening, and thank you very much for a great evening. Last night, our president declared that America had reduced its carbon emissions more than any other country in the world in the State of the Union. Much of that, of course, is about substitution of natural gas for coal, which is a cleaner process. But one of the things that's always concerned me is the net emissions around fracking, and that we may know that they reduce coal use at the end use, but what about the whole process of collection? I mean, I'm one of those people in the public who watch Gasland. You saw what euphemistically we called fugitive emissions, whether they came out of your faucet when you turned the water on, or you never saw it because it's invisible and you can't smell it. So what about the mechanics of fracking and how much natural gas is actually escaping? And is there any net positive value for going after more natural gas with the expectation that it will be a cleaner fuel for a short period?
Here again, we're looking at a situation of dueling studies and scientific reports. On the one hand, the oil and gas industry and the EPA have come out suggesting that the methane emissions from fracking are minimal, and therefore shale gas produced through fracking is better for the climate than burning coal. A problem, of course, is that methane is a much more powerful greenhouse gas than CO2 over short periods of time, up to 100 times as powerful a greenhouse gas. So, if in the process of producing natural gas, very much of it is released into the atmosphere, then the benefit of switching from coal to natural gas is obviated. On the other hand, there have been studies that have shown that the amount of methane released is substantial. So who is right? It appears once again, if you read the studies carefully, that the studies done by the industry and by the EPA were very narrowly constructed around wells that were operating perfectly. And whereas the studies done, including by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, just looking at the amount of methane being emitted in a producing area, measured by airplane with instruments from the air, showed very large amounts of methane actually being emitted. Which study is right? Well, I think clearly the NOAA study is going to tell us it's the real world rather than the ideal situation. So those real world studies are telling us that, in fact, natural gas produced by fracking is not better for the climate than burning coal.
If I could say a little more about that, that question in a sense was about natural gas production, and most of the fracking done in California is about oil. But one of the things that people aren't aware of is that there are natural gas pockets around where they go after the oil. And so when they get access to the oil and they bring up the natural gas with it, they'll tend to just flare it or let it burn off in the middle of the night where you don't see it. And so that is a part of what's causing the climate change that is associated with fracking for oil in California. And it's not, there's been some studies in Los Angeles where the amount of methane that's coming out of their drilling for oil there is, even at the lowest measurement, is more than what it would mean to make that oil worse than coal as an energy source.
They call some of the studies that have been funded by the industry frackademia instead of academia.
Good evening. Thank you. I have to say the word sustainable, Marin. So we've been comparing, we've been talking about fracking in California, and we've been talking about fracking and its relative merits against coal. I believe I heard our president last night talk about changing the fuel that we use in our automobiles and making natural gas available as a propellant for private cars or transport vehicles of various kinds. So relative to the problems of fracking natural gas and comparing that to petroleum gas that we use in our cars, as well as the national direction is heading more toward natural gas, and great, we're maybe putting coal aside and some of those issues may be ameliorated by not using coal, even though we have other issues from fracking. Anyway, can you all comment at all about what's going on at the national level? We're trying to set some standards in California and be a model for good citizenship and good consumership, but at the national level, it seems to be going the wrong way, and I'm concerned about using natural gas in cars now, and we have the abundance of fracked natural gas. Thanks.
It's very temporary abundance. I mean, we have to see this in context. Prior to the shale gas boom, around the middle of last decade, 2004, 2005, natural gas was getting scarce and expensive in North America. Conventional natural gas production was declining, and we were seeing prices in the range of $10, $12, and even higher per 1,000 cubic feet or a million BTU, whichever. The torrent of shale gas production that's come on over the last 3, 4, 5 years has lowered the price of natural gas and created the perception of abundance. But this is it's a flash in the pan. Already, every one of the shale gas plays in the U.S., with the exception of one, is declining in production, and the one that's still increasing is the Marcellus, Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And there are only so many places to drill in the sweet spots in the Marcellus. So clearly, within the next 2, 3, 4 years, this boom is going to go bust. So to try to transition the U.S. transportation fleet over to natural gas, which is a multi-year, possibly multi-decade process, on the basis of an expectation of an abundance of natural gas lasting, for decades and a century or more, is completely foolish. The industry right now is pushing natural gas exports. Again, not because of an actual abundance, because the U.S. is still a net natural gas importer. But natural gas exports are being pushed solely for the reason that the industry needs higher natural gas prices in order to stop bleeding red on their balance sheets. And of course, that will mean higher natural gas prices for American consumers and industry. But
with regard to transportation, I don't know if you've noticed, but every new parking lot has more and more electric vehicle infrastructure, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. More and more hybrids on the highway. And so as the boom and bust of natural gas starts to fail and peak oil ends and we have less and less hydrocarbons and petroleum, we'll have more and more electric vehicles on the road. More and more people are buying electric vehicle technology. And so I see that as a positive thing.
I got to tour the Tesla factory down in Fremont a few weeks ago, and it was so exciting to see. They have a map. These cars are just unbelievably crazy. It's like it's like seeing the future. And they have on the screen in the car, they have a map of all of the supercharging stations that Tesla itself has built. And these are solar powered charging stations that will charge their cars in 40 minutes or whatever. And it's amazing because that's one company that's building out an infrastructure. And I think the idea that we as the U.S. government would spend time to choose to build out a natural gas vehicle infrastructure when we could be choosing a different path that would be taking us away from fossil fuels, whether it's natural gas or oil, the choice is so clear to me. And I think that we need to be pushing the president and everyone to understand that we need to make the right choice and not sort of find this false solution that Tony Ingraffi, who's a researcher from Cornell, calls the gangplank to the future, not the bridge.
Just another quick comment on what was just said. We're having 350 Bay Area is having a conference on May 9th where Mark Jacobson, Stanford University professor, who has a plan, California plan, a very detailed one, for having us be completely renewable for all forms of energy by 2050. And it's very doable technologically, and it would pay for itself in 7 years. So.
Okay, well, my question is that I've experienced a little bit of confusion about the environmental movement opposing all fossil fuels equally, because we're faced with stuff like the XL Keystone pipeline, which is going to bring a lot of terribly dirty fuel. And coal is also very dirty. So in view of that, why are we not like at least a little bit in favor of something like gas or sweet crude, which is much better? I mean, because we can't just go off the fossil fuel system like that. It's just not going to happen. So that's my question.
I'd like to quote Congressman Jared Huffman: "The biggest hoax being played on the American people by the fossil fuel industry is that clean energy is too expensive."
There was a great piece in the Washington Post, Wonk blog, that I encourage people to read. It's sort of testing this question of, of what does natural gas really get us? And you're right, when it's burned for electricity, it produces half the CO2 emissions of coal. There are obviously concerns with the leakage throughout the system. But, if it's displacing dirtier sources of fuel, potentially does have a role to play. But studies have shown that that role has to be short. If we want to keep our CO2 concentration, atmospheric concentration below 450 parts per million, which, scientists sort of agree is what we need to even have like a 50-50 shot at keeping our temperature rise to 2 degrees C, then even if we are producing gas with the best methods and it's replacing dirtier fuels, our natural gas use still has to peak by about 2020 or 2030 if we want to meet those goals. So maybe it has a limited role to play. Maybe it can help firming renewables, but we do still need to move off all fossil fuels as rapidly as possible. But I agree that if we can't get off them tomorrow, we do need to be using the best ones available. But yeah, there's no question that if we want to avert the most catastrophic effects of climate change, we've got to cut it off.
I think one of the go ahead, David. One of the things that keeps us from moving as fast as we otherwise could, I think, is the false perception of abundance. The belief that's being fostered by radio and TV ads constantly from the industry, the belief that we have an abundance of natural gas for decades to come, and it's better for the climate than burning coal. And therefore, there's a real sense of complacency among the American public that we don't really have to do this very fast. It's okay. It's being handled. The president told us last night that our greenhouse gas emissions are going down, so everything's okay. It's not okay.
I'll just make this really fast. We've heard a lot tonight about sort of the short-term benefits of fracking, if there are any benefits. One thing I didn't hear you guys talk about was with the casings in the wells and just the long-term impact in terms of the the prospects of these failing long-term. So maybe one of you could talk about that. Just even decades from now, we've finished the drilling, they've capped the well. What could be the consequences of having these in the ground for decades, hundreds of years to come?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. It's already a problem. There are tens of thousands of orphaned and abandoned wells in this country. We've been drilling oil and gas wells since the 1850s, and you can imagine what sort of practices they were using then. I mean, we're talking about wooden casing, plugging it with tree stumps. During World War II, they needed the steel, so they pulled the casing from a lot of wells, and it's already a big problem. Obviously practices are evolving, but we have to worry about past practices that have been used that aren't as sophisticated. Current practices we still have to worry about. There are already problems with the initial construction of having Wells have mechanical integrity problems, and then obviously as they age, the incidence is going to increase. So yeah, it's absolutely a concern. We're punching thousands of holes in our ground, and those are direct pathways from hydrocarbon-bearing formations up to groundwater. So yeah, it's undoubtedly a concern. It's already a problem, and with more wells, it'll just continue to become an even greater problem.
Okay, there we are. While Greg is turning the podium around, I just want to refer back to the disclaimer Greg gave you earlier this evening to comment that, the Environmental Forum does not take sides on issues. And so here's what I want to say. This is not the position of the forum formally, okay? I will take responsibility for the strong anti-message that you heard tonight. In all good conscience, with what I've understood and learned about fracking, I could not in good conscience stand up here and have some way of saying that there's some benefits to this. I just think the environmental impacts so far outweigh any of the benefits. So I take responsibility for the message being rather anti. I wasn't looking for an applause. But that said, I also want to just thank our panelists, everybody. Thank you so much. And if you go back to our website after tonight, as you've probably seen when you registered, we have pages for the different topics. So there is a fracking page on our website. And there you will find a link called Readings and Resources. So we will be updating that with some additional information from tonight, as well as we will be posting a video that Main Street Moms produced. Two of their members, Kathy Calloway and Mary Morgan, who's a graduate of the forum, produced a 30-minute video about fracking. So that will be on our website, as well as the slides from tonight. I'll put those up there. And then also remember to go back to refer to the website to find out about our next session, which is my segue for Greg.
Before I repeat the information about our upcoming sessions, I just want to give a little perspective for a minute or two. I think it's amazing, and it's a credit to Marin, that we have gone on a topic which has flown so far below the radar. I suspect that many of us, like me, first heard about fracking maybe the year before last, if we were lucky enough to see the movie Gasland. How many people saw the movie Gasland? Now, I doubt in any other community in the state or the country would that higher percentage have seen that obscure little movie that didn't make it, as I recall, to the mainstream movie theaters. I saw it at the Fairfax Women's Club with a private showing, and that's probably how most of us saw it, on DVD or something. And look how quickly it moved to last year. There was a very important bill in the California legislature, SB 4 was mentioned extensively tonight, and we heard that various bills for moratoriums or bans fell by the wayside, leaving only SB 4. And how many of you remember that environmental organizations were split on SB 4 right up until the last week before the bill passed? Some said, we got to pass this. It's the best thing we have going. It's the only thing left. It's better than nothing. It's disclosure. It's regulation. Others were saying, no, defeat it, because a better one will come along next year. But the others were saying, no, once they pass this, they'll forget about it and they won't do anything. So it was really a tough call. I remember calling Assemblymember Levine's district director and having a chat with him. By the way, you all should do that, because then you get on his list and then he will send you letters. It's amazing how old-fashioned, low-tech methods still work. You can call up his office on the phone. They will send you letters in the mail. You should do that. And in addition to your high-tech methods. But again, it is a credit to Marin County that a topic that is still so far below the radar screen of the mainstream media has gotten such the attention, and Marin is so knowledgeable and so aware and so environmentally sensitive that we'll get a turnout like this and a group like this, which sometimes is referred to the Environmental Forum as the Marin's best kept secret. You are taking a large step towards turning that reputation around and turning it into the well-known jewel and font of information that it is and should be. And so thank you for coming. And keep in mind that we have another session in a week and a half at the Sausalito Bay Model on Saturday, February 8th on sea level rise, another very hot topic. We only have a few dozen people signed up so far for that. We'd love to get 100 for that one as well. And as Nancy said, please check out the page on fracking for follow-ups to this, and on the Environmental Forum's website, marinefm.org, and take the bookmark and take a flyer. And hopefully you can come to the Sea Level Rise program in a week and a half, as I mentioned, and stay tuned for future announcements about the 2014 Masterclass scheduled to start at the end of August. Thank you all, and I hope to see many or most of you at the Bay Model a week and a half. Thanks. And hang around for further talks with Main Street Moms and 350 Marin on this topic, or in the lobby to get more information.